Welcome back to Ask the Educator, a podcast for all professionals involved in medical device processing and sponsored by Healthmark Industries. The education team here at Healthmark has 280 years of combined experience in areas ranging from sterile processing, endoscopy, OR, biomed, to hospital and industry leadership. Our goal is to leverage our collective experience to answer one of your questions each episode, giving you the practical tips you need to succeed in the evolving world of device processing. My name is Kevin Anderson, clinical educator here at Healthmark, and I will be your host. Let's get started. All right, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast, Ask the Educator. This is Kevin Anderson, your host. And back with me is Stephen Kovach. Steve, welcome back.
Hey, nice to be back here. We're getting down the list here, I think, Kevin. A few left, eh?
Yeah, I think we only have 2 more of the 10 factors of cleaning. So we're sprinting here to the finish line. And today, I think what we're going to look at for this episode will be the type of soil. So, Steve, if you could just kind of give us a little introduction to this type of soil being a 10 factors of cleaning.
Okay. And again, why do I think this should be a factor? Well, you got to think of the medical device. How is it being used and where it was used? And then when it comes back to you, how are you going to clean it? And I know most of us focus on surgical instruments, but I just want people to remember that there's some people who their department does everything. They clean from infusion pumps to surgical instruments to everything else. So they need different cleaning solutions and so on. So we're going to focus more on the surgical instruments. So you want to know the bioburden. Did it have blood, protein, fibrin, fecal matter? If it's an endoscope, how was it used? Where was it used? In what part of the body? And the presence of organic materials such as blood can result in sterilization failure or disinfection if you leave some behind. We know there's been studies by Dr. Alpha way back as 1996 about serum and salt being left behind and items can't be sterilized. And that's what's really important. And so if we think of the instruments we're using every day, the number one concern is blood. Wouldn't you say blood and its components, almost all the instruments are going to be exposed to blood, Kevin?
Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty good general rule of thumb. And something that I think is important too is that sometimes we don't realize what the soil is because after cleaning or after it makes it to the OR, people tend to lump everything together unless it's an obvious difference. A lot of times you get calls and it's just, oh, this is bioburden, and you're automatically thinking blood. But there's times I think of those little wall charts that tell you how to read our tests, like blood can not necessarily look like blood, but you know what I mean? By the time it gets to the OR and through our cleaning process or what have you, sometimes it is a little bit confusing. So it's good to know what the actual soil is. So it is obvious as it seems. It's good to try and find out what that soil actually is.
So I'm going to focus for a minute or so here on blood, and then I'm going to dovetail into that and try to give some insight for our listeners and tell them a good place to go. So if we think of blood as the number one component or the number one challenge, you got to understand what is blood made out of, and hemoglobin becomes highly insolvent when it dries out. So pre-cleaning, we talk about keeping instruments moist. You keep them moist so the hemoglobin doesn't start to dry out. And if it dries out, it becomes harder to clean. The fibrin, which is a coagulating agent in blood, is inherently water insoluble, meaning it takes a lot of water and time to clean it off, where the hemoglobin, the red stuff, if it's moist, it washes off easier. And then blood begins to denature depending on who you talk to around, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, somewhere, some say a little lower, some say a little harder. But when blood begins to denature, it becomes more insolvent and it bonds really strong with the substrate. And this would be the surgical instrument. And we know it's not smooth, it's rough in that when you look at it microscopically, and it dries and it just becomes more resistant to cleaning. And think of little roots on a plant. They grab into those little nooks and cranny. So if you don't wash it correctly and you don't have the right temperature and detergent, if your cleaning temperature was too hot at the beginning, that hemoglobin becomes harder to clean and could be left on the instrument. And so a lot of times this stuff might look invisible, but when it goes to get sterilized, all of a sudden you put that tray together and whoa, there were no spots, and all of a sudden spots were up there in the OR, right, Kevin? You were never called up to the OR for a spot on a tray, right? But it does happen in other places, correct?
Yeah, only in other places. Yeah,
Only in
never
other
been called to the OR. Yeah,
What's
of
that
course.
spot? What are they doing? But, you have to think again. You said earlier, it's this whole process. So that helps you to understand what is a stain. And so what should you be looking for and testing for? And, you can test for blood and protein, and there's simple ways of doing it. But I want to give our German counterparts there, the CSSDs and the working groups out there, they have what's called the Red Book. It's AKI, and it's free, and you can download it. They've got an excellent chapter, a few pages about water, and we've talked about water, but what stains are, if you see brown or red or white, or what causes pitting. And that's where we forget that we need to look at a lot of resources, but they need to work with your instrument companies. Kevin, did you ever work with yours where you sent them a dirty instrument and they tried to research the spot or anything like that? Did you ever try doing that?
Yeah, and we didn't do so much with the instrument itself, sending it out if we were concerned, only because if we thought it was soil, we wanted to try and take care of it there. But we have had instances where we had, maybe I was actually called to the OR at some point for spots or whatever that might have showed up. But what we ended up doing was going to our steam sterilizer manufacturer and asking them to look into our steam quality and do some testing on that. And then we've done our own sort of testing on the spots, for protein tests and hemoglobin tests, things like that. We did sort of internally.
Yeah. There's another thing. I was in a sterile processing department and I hadn't seen this in a long time. This is about a year and a half ago. They had an eraser on their workstation. And I says, wow, old school? And the person looked at me and says, what do you mean? I says, I don't see erasers much on sterile processing departments anymore, work tables. Says, yeah, I had somebody tell me about that, a simple way to see if there's corrosion. You use an eraser and try to erase the spot or the stain, and you take it off, you look for pitting or whatever. And there are some little tricks in that people can read and learn about. But I think it's very important, if you get stumped, to understand you've got your instrument manufacturer, even your sterilizer or washer. You can send some of these instruments out. Now, nothing's for free, but it is a service they give you because you are buying the instruments. Take good pictures, send it out, and go from there. But you should have a process that there should be no spots on your instruments when they come out of the washer, and no spots after you sterilize them. And that's very important. I'm going to do one more quick thing here. I was also at a facility that the staff took alcohol, and they would wipe the instrument on the assembly side with alcohol because they thought it was hard water and they thought the alcohol would do something. Well, lo and behold, that spot, I tested it, was really residual of blood. And by them using alcohol, that denatured it more. That problem showed up later after the sterilization process. That alcohol didn't do it. So you've got to know your process and your chemicals. Kevin, it's
Yeah, the alcohol, you've got to be really careful with that. Number one, does the instrument manufacturer allow for that in the IFU? And number two, if you're not sure what the soil is, like we said earlier, blood doesn't always necessarily look just like it did in the beginning when it was freshly soiled in the OR after all of our cleaning process. So you have to be careful. Alcohol acts as a fixative as well. So you could actually be fixating your blood product onto the instrument, which is obviously what we do not want to do.
That's true. That was a great term, fixative, Kevin. Thank you. And I don't want people all of a sudden going in their departments and buying erasers and putting their, look, work with your management team, work with your instrument repair company.
Mm-hmm.
Their technicians can come and help and tell you how to use it. Then how do you clean the instrument after? I don't want people erasing them and then all of a sudden trays show up in the OR and they're seeing eraser things in their tray. Now, wait a minute. Again, you got to work through the process and understand what these different tools tell you, like swabbing and so on. And I know a lot of people use ATP, and it's good in the way of it's clean or not, but it doesn't help to find the spot. And that's what you're really trying to do. Is it protein? Is it blood? Is it carbohydrates? Is it something else? There's a lot of tests out there, and or is it residual detergent, or hard water spots or whatever. So I think the reason I use the type of soil to be clean is important. It gets back to the type of detergent you use, the right water temperature, the right water. They all work together to remove the soil on the medical device, because cleaning is a foundation for high-level disinfection and sterilization. And we know that Dr. Elvis said that the presence of residual soil with serum and salt will impair sterilization. So you want to get them as clean as possible and not have any residual left. And if you do, try to figure out what it is so you make your process better. How's that, Kevin?
Yeah, I think that's good, Stephen. And I like that you brought up the detergent thing because, again, these things kind of go hand in hand. And with enzymatics, you got to remember that not all the enzymatics are the same. So there's different types for different types of soils. And within those detergents, you may have 2 enzymes, you may have 3 enzymes. Some of them, I think, even have 4 enzymes.
Yeah.
So you got to know your detergent. What is it built to take care of in terms of soils? What are your common soils? And do the detective work when you find those problems. Find out what soil it is so that you can address it within your cleaning process. I think that's basically what we're trying to get at.
Yeah.
And, with the entire 10 factor series is that there are going to be issues at some point. And we're just trying to give you all these different things that could be playing into it. So I think that's really what we're trying to go for here.
Well, I'm going to close with something I haven't used in about 14, 15 years. When the program CSI was big out there, I was afraid of getting sued. So I use the term CSSI. It's Central Service Sterilization Investigator. That's what we really are. You were a man, Kevin, and we're getting close on time, but as a manager or your leads, when there's an issue, you investigate, you drill down. And that's part of what we do every day. And you need the right tools, and you need to understand your cleaning process. And thus you need to know the type of soil you got to clean off these devices. If you don't match up the right products, and you might have a cleaning solution, a detergent, as you said, that maybe doesn't work on the soil you're trying to clean. So we wrapped it up sort of, but we left them with other questions for you to get answered by some other experts that I'm not that great on when it comes to detergents and solutions, Kevin? So
yeah, that's right. Hopefully we'll have some of that coming up soon. But I like the CSSI. That's great. I love that. And
maybe we'll start using it or something. Make a program of it,
There you go.
or sell detective hats with little monocles in our eyes. There'll be 4X, right? So we could look at those robotic arms, right? No, I'm sorry. That's all something else, Kevin. I'm sorry. I'm getting a little slap happy here. So, okay.
All right. I think that does it for this episode on type of soil, but I just want to thank you again, Stephen, for joining me. Appreciate it.
All right. We'll talk to you later, my friend.
All right. Just to quickly recap this episode, Stephen Kovach and I discussed how type of soil is one of the 10 factors of cleaning. It is important to understand the type of soil you're trying to clean and its components. Remember, this will be particularly important for departments that process different equipment like infusion pumps or endoscopes. When you do come across an unknown stain or soil, it's a good idea to test it and investigate what type of soil it is. You can do that by using various cleaning verification products like ProCheck, which tests for protein, or HemoCheck, which tests for hemoglobin. These are just a few of the different tests that can be used to determine the cause for a stain or some substance left behind on an instrument. I want to thank you for tuning in for this latest episode in the 10 Factors of Cleaning series. If you have any topics you'd like us to address or questions that you might have, please submit them to asktheeducator@hmark.com. All opinions expressed on this show are those of the presenters. Before using any medical device, it is important to review the device manufacturer's instructions for use.